Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Rethinking Teacher Supervision and Evaluation: How to Work Smart, Build Collaboration, and Close the Achievement Gap. Second edition. By Kim Marshall. Narrated by Steve Menasche. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures, tables, exhibits, and other forms of visual materials present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Introduction. Principal evaluation of teachers is a low-leverage strategy for improving schools, particularly in terms of the time it requires of principals. Richard DeFore and Robert Marzano. Write-ups have low to medium leverage on influencing teacher practice. John Saphir. To many educators, these two quotes from three of America's leading authorities on instructional improvement are shocking and counterintuitive. For decades, the assumption has been that if we want to improve teaching, supervision and evaluation are effective levers. Surely, the argument went, inspecting classroom performance and giving teachers feedback and formal evaluations would make a positive difference. But when educators take a few minutes to reflect on what DeFore, Marzano, and Saphir are saying, it begins to make sense. I frequently ask groups of administrators to think back to when they were teachers and raise their hands if an evaluation ever led them to make significant improvements in the way they taught. Typically, around 5% raise a hand. When I ask if the evaluations that principals themselves have written produce significant classroom improvements, I get a similar response. Most principals sheepishly admit that after all the work they put into all those pre-observation conferences, classroom visits, write-ups, and post-conferences, they rarely see much difference in what teachers do, much less in student achievement. This is disturbing. It means that school leaders are spending huge amounts of time on a process that rarely improves classroom teaching. And teaching, after all, is the heart of the matter. Research has shown that the quality of instruction is the single most important factor in student achievement. Good teaching really matters. This was not always the conventional wisdom. For years, factors outside the schoolhouse were believed to be the main determinants of how children did. Social class, innate intelligence, family background, community dynamics, negative peer pressure, racism, and discrimination. But now we know that good classroom teaching can overcome the disadvantages with which many students enter school, and that children who grow up in poverty are not doomed to failure. Figure I.1 shows the dramatic difference in the achievement of students who have 3 years of effective, mediocre, or ineffective teaching. Good teaching helps all students, but it turns out that it makes a bigger difference for some than for others. Figure I.2 shows the results of a study that compared the impact of effective and ineffective teachers on students as they moved from 5th to 7th grade. Students who were lucky enough to have effective teaching for 3 years in a row achieved at almost identically high levels, even though some started with much lower achievement than others. But a matched sample of students who had 3 years of ineffective teaching fared quite differently. Those who started out with high and average achievement were still doing quite well at the end of 7th grade. But students who started out with low skills did much worse. This study, and others like it, show that low-achieving students benefit disproportionately from good teaching. Unfortunately, the children who need good teaching the most, those who are economically disadvantaged, members of minority groups, and those with special needs and language deficits, are more likely to attend schools with an inexperienced, transient teacher corps and unfavorable, sometimes chaotic, learning environments. So here's the logic of the preceding paragraphs. A. Teaching really matters. B. Not all teaching is equally effective. C. Teaching quality is unevenly distributed by class and race, and therefore, D. There is an inexorable day-by-day widening of the achievement gap across the nation. Some broad societal challenges flow from this analysis. How to get our most effective teachers teaching our neediest students. How to create working conditions that will attract them to some pretty embattled schools. And how to create an esprit in the National Teacher Corps, similar to that among firefighters, among whom the best and bravest want to work in firehouses with the best fires. That is, the most challenging ones. But for the short term, we can draw a conclusion with which almost every parent would agree. Every principal's most important job is getting good teaching in every classroom. Which brings us to the subject matter of this book. What is the best way to get effective teaching for every child? For starters, hiring and firing. Removing ineffective teachers is critically important, as is hiring talented and hardworking teachers, since every vacancy is a golden opportunity to upgrade the team. But vacancies don't occur that frequently. So, while hiring and firing are tremendously important, this book will focus on strategies for supporting and improving the teachers, ranging from excellent to ineffective, who are in classrooms now. In recent years, schools and districts have tried a variety of approaches for improving teaching. More aggressive supervision and evaluation, using test scores to evaluate teachers, publishing teachers' test scores in newspapers, merit pay for high-performing teachers, revamping the teacher evaluation forms that principals fill out, doing learning walk or instructional rounds tours of schools with feedback to the staff, getting teachers to visit exemplary classrooms and schools, having teachers analyze student work, requiring teachers to use highly scripted curriculum programs, providing laptop computers for every student, encouraging teachers to use the internet to find effective ideas and materials, setting up critical friends groups in which teachers read and discuss articles and books, and the old standby, getting teachers to attend workshops and courses inside and outside their schools. Each of these approaches can contribute to the quality of instruction under the right conditions, and they all have proponents. But I believe there is a much more powerful way to improve teaching and learning and close the achievement gap. This book will present 4 closely linked strategies centering on specific actions principals can take. A. Making short, unannounced classroom visits followed by one-on-one feedback conversations. B. Participating much more actively in the curriculum unit planning process. C. Working with teacher teams to analyze and follow up on interim assessment results. And D. Using rubrics for end-of-year teacher evaluation. I believe these are the most effective ways for a principal to exercise instructional leadership and make a real difference at the classroom level. Figure I.3 is a diagram that will evolve over the course of this book to show how the four strategies interact. Implementing these four strategies involves fundamental changes in the way principals handle supervision and evaluation and the professional dynamic within schools. School leaders shift in these ways: from periodically evaluating teaching to continuously analyzing learning, from infrequent announced classroom visits to frequent unannounced visits, from taking extensive notes on one or two lessons a year to watching for key teaching points in each of a number of visits, from guarded, inauthentic communication with teachers to candid give and take based on authentic classroom observation, from formal yearly or twice-yearly evaluations to continuous suggestions and redirection, culminating in an end-of-year evaluation, from inadvertently sowing envy and division among teachers to empowering and energizing teacher teams, from teachers saying, "Let me do it my way," to everyone asking, "Is it working?" From administrators doing most of the work to teachers taking on real responsibility for improving teaching and learning. From evaluating individual lessons to supervising the effectiveness of curriculum units. From one right way evaluation criteria to constantly looking at new ideas and practices. From focusing mainly on ineffective teachers to improving teaching in every classroom. From cumbersome, time-consuming evaluations to streamlined rubrics. From being mired in paperwork to continuously orchestrating school-wide improvement. This book comes from my own experience, extensive research, and close observation of scores of effective and ineffective schools. 32 years as a Boston teacher, central office administrator, and principal were the starting point. Since leaving the Boston schools in 2002, I have continued to develop my initial insights and practices and have presented them in hundreds of workshops and consultations in a wide variety of schools and districts. These ideas have been adopted in part by a number of schools. Although there is no gold standard research on the model, I believe the combination of all four elements is the key to dramatic gains. Many observations have a powerful logic, and I challenge listeners to present a better system for seeing what is really going on in classrooms on a daily basis and coaching teachers throughout the year. Curriculum unit planning has a strong track record all over the world, thanks to the work of Grant Wiggins, Jay McTighe, and their colleagues. Interim assessments have robust research support and a number of successful practitioners. And teacher evaluation rubrics, while they are very recent arrivals in schools, just make sense. Here's a chapter-by-chapter overview of the book. Chapter 1 tells the story of my 15-year Boston principalship, during which my colleagues and I struggled against significant obstacles and realized quite late in the game that major gains in student achievement are difficult without external standards linked to good assessments. Chapter 2 describes the design flaws in the conventional supervision and evaluation process that explain why it rarely improves teaching and learning. Chapter 3 gives the blow-by-blow of my initial failure as a principal to get supervision and evaluation working well, and my discovery of mini observations, an effective way of getting into classrooms and giving teachers feedback. Chapter 4 is an analysis of 12 key factors for implementing mini observations successfully. Chapter 5 broadens the usual definition of supervision to include principals working with teacher teams as they clarify learning goals and backwards design curriculum units, all of which helps teachers draw on each other's insights and wisdom and makes the principal a more perceptive and helpful thought partner during and after classroom observations. Chapter 6 broadens supervision further still, describing how principals can direct and support teacher teams as they look at interim assessment results, figure out learning problems, help struggling students, involve students in improving their own performance, and continuously improve instruction. Chapter 7 returns to a major flaw in traditional year-end teacher evaluations: how time-consuming and disrespected they often are, and presents a set of teacher evaluation rubrics that are more time-efficient and give teachers succinct, detailed, and constructive end-of-year feedback. Chapter 8 deconstructs the time management challenge that all principals face and suggests 10 ways school leaders can survive, do first things first, and get the engine of improvement humming in their schools. Chapter 9 suggests ways that superintendents can support and direct the work of principals as they implement this 4-part model. The chapter includes a principal evaluation rubric. Chapter 10 sums up, describing how mini-observations, curriculum planning, interim assessments, and teacher evaluation rubrics interact and build on each other. By successfully orchestrating these 4 components, principals can build collaboration with and among teachers and foster continuous improvement of teaching and learning aimed at closing the achievement gap. Appendix A is a model of a slim curriculum outcomes booklet, a clear statement of what students need to know and be able to do by the end of the year. Appendix B is a sampling of short write-ups to teachers after mini-observations and follow-up talks. These were written by a principal and assistant principal in New York City who are using the approach described in this book. Appendix C is a comparison of my teacher evaluation rubrics with Charlotte Danielson's Framework for Learning. Throughout this book, the word principal is used as shorthand for all school-based administrators. Listeners should take this to include assistant principals, deans, department heads, and any other professionals who supervise and evaluate teachers. Chapter 1 The Challenge: Closing the Achievement Gap. Knowledge powers a global economy that is utterly unforgiving to the unskilled, uneducated young adult. Joel Klein, former New York City Schools Chancellor. I became principal of Boston's Mather Elementary School late in the summer of 1987, absolutely determined to boost achievement and convinced that supervising and evaluating teachers was at the core of my role as an instructional leader. But had I reflected more carefully on the preceding 17 years, when I was a teacher, graduate student, and central office administrator, I might have anticipated some of the bumps that lay ahead. Supervision as seen by a rookie teacher. Fresh out of college in 1969, I began teaching at Boston's Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School. Supremely ill-equipped to handle a class of 25 energetic 6th graders, I had a rough first year. A supervisor from Boston's central office visited several times and was highly critical. So my first exposure to teacher evaluation was one in which my job was on the line. I was one of a number of first-year teachers at the King, and we all regarded this man with fear and loathing. We groused about how the only things he cared about were quiet students, a clean chalkboard ledge, and window shades pulled down at exactly the same height. Disdain for this vision of good teaching was fiercest among those of us who were having the most trouble with classroom discipline. Imagine our glee when students turned the supervisor's Volkswagen Beetle upside down in the parking lot one spring afternoon. But the supervisor was right to criticize my teaching, and the point was driven home when I invited a professor from Harvard's Graduate School of Education to observe. He sat patiently through a couple of lessons and said afterward that he hadn't seen one iota of learning take place. This was not exactly what I wanted to hear, but the comment, from a somewhat more authoritative source, was right on target. One of the school's assistant principals was assigned to the 6th grade corridor, and he knew I was struggling. But there were so many other crises in the building that he wasn't able to give me detailed feedback or substantive help. Somehow I got through the year without being fired, perhaps an acute teacher shortage in Boston helped, and spent the beginning of the summer writing an article vividly describing my experiences. Marshall, 1970, Law and Order in Grade 6E, published a little later in the Harvard Bulletin. After it came out, I received perhaps the most devastating evaluation an idealistic young urban teacher could receive. Your article clearly shows that whites do not belong in black schools. With all your woes and problems, you forgot that the 25 black students you taught have had another year robbed from them. And people wonder why, when they become adults, they can't make it in society. It is unfortunate that you had to gain your experience by stealing 25 children's lives for a year. However, Honky, your day will come. From one black who reads the Harvard Bulletin. In my second year, I implemented learning stations, a decentralized style of teaching with students working on materials I wrote myself. And right away, things were calmer and more productive. The principal was quite supportive of my unconventional teaching style, even bringing visitors up to my classroom from time to time. But I rarely got any direct evaluative feedback. Did my students learn a lot? I believed they did, judging from weekly tests I created, but I was never accountable to any external standards. These were the 1970s. There was no state curriculum to speak of, and measurable student outcomes weren't part of the conversation. For the school's embattled administrators, the important thing was that there were almost no discipline crises or parent complaints emanating from my classroom. During these years, I operated very much as a loner, closing my classroom door and doing my own thing. At one point, I actually cut the wires of the intercom speaker to silence the incessant school-wide PA announcements. Here was teacher isolation at its most extreme. If World War III had broken out, my students and I might have missed it. Out of the classroom. After 8 years of teaching, I stepped out of my classroom to act as the King School's education coordinator, a grant-funded curriculum support role that allowed me to work on curriculum improvement, but barred me from evaluation because I was still in the same bargaining unit as my colleagues. As I moved around the school, I noticed that the curriculum was highly fragmented, with teachers covering a wide variety of material without a coherent sequence from grade 6 to 7 to 8, and the quality of teaching varied widely, with no agreed-upon definition of best practice. I saw all this clearly, but my soft administrative status prevented me from making much of a difference. After 2 years as education coordinator, I returned to the classroom, believing that I could have more impact teaching one group of students. But it wasn't the same. I had definitely been bitten by the administrative bug, and this was reinforced as I pondered a series of New York Times articles about an intriguing wave of research on schools that somehow managed to get very high student achievement in tough urban neighborhoods. One prominent exponent was Harvard Graduate School of Education professor Ronald Edmonds, who boiled the formula for effective urban schools to 5 variables: strong instructional leadership, high expectations, a focus on basics, effective use of test data, a safe and humane climate. A 1979 British study, 15,000 hours, Rudder, Mon, Mortimer, Austin, and Smith, 1979, had a similar message, describing the ethos and expectations that made some schools much more effective than others. All the effective schools research emphasized the importance of the principal going beyond routine administrative functions and being an instructional leader. I began to think seriously about becoming a principal. The problem was that I didn't have administrative certification, so in 1980, I bid an emotional farewell to the King's School, where I had spent 11 formative years, and enrolled in Harvard's Graduate School of Education. I had the good fortune to study with Ronald Edmonds himself, and his searing comment on failing urban schools became my credo. We can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need in order to do this. Whether we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. I was raring to go, but during my year in graduate school, the voters of Massachusetts passed a tax-limiting referendum, sending Boston into a budget tailspin and forcing the district to close 27 schools. There was no way I was going to be a principal in the near future, and I prepared a return to the classroom. Then, through a chance connection, I was recruited to serve on the transition team of Boston's new superintendent, Robert Bud Spillane, a forceful advocate of high student achievement and school accountability. He and I hit it off immediately, and I ended up spending the next 6 years in the central office, first as a speechwriter, policy advisor, and director of curriculum, then under Spillane's successor, Laval Wilson, as director of an ambitious system-wide strategic planning process. The Nation at Risk report of National Commission on Excellence in Education dominated the national discourse during this period, and I found myself in the thick of Boston's response to the rising tide of mediocrity acerbically described in the report. My central office colleagues and I did some useful work. We produced a set of K-12 grade-by-grade learning expectations and curriculum tests. But throughout my 6 years as a district bureaucrat, I felt that our efforts to improve schools were like pushing a string. There weren't enough like-minded principals at the other end pulling our initiatives into classrooms, and we didn't make much of a dent in Boston's abysmal student achievement. I was more convinced than ever that the real action was at the school level, and I longed to be a principal. My own ship. In 1987, I finally got my chance. Laval Wilson put me in charge of the Mather, a 600-student K-5 school with low achievement and a veteran staff. As I took the reins, I believed I was ready to turn the school around after having seen the urban educational challenge from 3 perspectives: as a cussedly independent teacher, as a student of the research on effective urban schools, and as a big-picture central office official. Now I could really make a difference for kids. So how did it go? During my 15 years as Mather principal, the school made significant gains. Our students...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?